Guys thinking of buying real estate properties in Zimbabwe, whether you're thinking of Harare, Rusape, Mutare, Kivu, or Mrambinda. In this video, I'm going to share with you some of the things that I have learned and particularly some insights on the Zimbabwe real estate market. I started thinking about considering diversifying our investment portfolio, my family and I, to Zimbabwe, about a little bit about a month or so, and I started digging deeper and doing research. But one thing that I found very quickly was that I really have to be very careful, because what you see, the more I started reaching out to banks or other partners, talking to realtors on the ground and friends, I realized that, well, while it is a very booming market, there are a lot of potential scammers, a lot of people can potentially lose money. So in this video, I'm going to share some of those experiences, to share with you my views, how I run some numbers, how I do due diligence, and also some things to avoid when you are considering buying real estate, so that you avoid expensive mistakes. However, I'm just going to share with you guys that, as a disclaimer, this is not supposed to be taken as an investment advice or legal advice. You must always consult an expert to make sure that you do things the right way. But also, if you want to learn more, or if you want me to run numbers, I'm very happy to do that, of course, for a fee. So you can book a coaching session, or for me to do a due diligence or an analysis in terms of investment opportunities on www.streetwiseeconomics.com. So let's get started. And the first thing is that the Zimbabwean property market is very interesting. It has been booming. And now what that means is it has been mostly characterized by the sellers market. A lot of people are selling versus the demand. So in other words, the prices have been going up. So if you are looking at probably 8% growth in the real estate market across Zimbabwe, and of course, when you are buying property, you have to look at location and there are factors that come into being. But on average, if you are looking at potentially buying a house, on average, the national average, according to properties.com, you are looking at an average house of 230,000, but also a national average of 128,000. So if you look at Harare, on average, you're looking at probably 230,000 on average. But the national average, because there are other areas in Zimbabwe that have lower property prices, so the national average tends to be lower, to be pulled down. Now, why would I want to invest in property in Zimbabwe? Well, I was born in Zimbabwe. I always have a soft spot for Zimbabwe. Now, I also have a bit of access to capital here if I want to use a line of credit, or maybe use a bit of cash, or take some money from my investments and diversify. So that's the thinking. Maybe at some point, if we want to, my family and I, we want to go to Zimbabwe, that might be something to just go, and we know we have our own house. But also, maybe if we can buy one or two properties and get maybe 10% or 8% per year, that would be a nice return, and rent it out. Sounds right, but the reality is that it's much complicated than that. Now, the first thing that I quickly learned as I was doing research was that, I reached out to some banks, I went online, and it has been very interesting. A lot of them, they are saying, okay, we are selling this property, but it's not serviced, it doesn't have fully functional roads. Some are gated communities. I was looking at Marondera, Harare, Chivu, Murambinda, Mutare. But now, what I found interesting is that for some that have title deeds, they are quite expensive. Now, because if you have title deeds, you can go and get some money, you can borrow, you can use that as a asset, a security, right? But the thing is, now constructing can be quite expensive. Now, what I noticed is that sometimes if I want to buy land, let's say for with a budget of 50,000, I could buy 20,000 land and then construct it approximately, let's say 30,000. But I would still need to upgrade and install solar system, borehole, and of course always consult with the local authorities. But the most important thing from my experience is it's good and important to do that, to do due diligence, right? For me, I would settle for something that is title deeds, whether it's more expensive, but even if, but I can pay the lawyer fees, maybe if it's 4%, but there's also other nuances that I am going to describe. But I just wanted to give you that context to say, look, it's a very interesting and lucrative market. But remember, markets or assets do not always appreciate. Sometimes they go up and sometimes they go down. Now, when I look at this, I also want to compare and look at what we call opportunity cost as economists. If I invest money, let's say I get 8% at the current rate of real estate growth in Zimbabwe, compared to my average, let's say if I just look at my past return, let's say 28% per year, it's extremely high compared to the average for most investors. But the thing is, it's difficult to sustain that. But let's just say hypothetically, I have an opportunity to invest in land in Zimbabwe at 8%. If I have 50,000 that I want to invest in land and build the house, in 30 years, that would be 503,000 approximately, right? And a lot of it is compound interest, assuming everything is constant. Now, if I have 28% compounded per year in the stock market, I can easily buy and sell, let's say, right? I maintain that kind of return. That could be 82 million easily at 30 years at 28% compounded return if I invest, take the same 50,000. But again, the catch is now to maintain that 28% growth. But at least from what I have learned is that, and I've shown you guys that when I'm trading, one of my accounts that I shared with you guys, I've been trading real money. I started with 21,400 Canadian dollars. Now I have been compounding that. At least the past 6 months is 58% so far, right? So let's say if I just then grow it at, let's say, 70% by the end of the year, I could possibly get a much lower return, but I always try to hedge my portfolio in conservatively. So for me, I'm in a privileged position. I can, trade in very highly liquid markets in the US and in Canada, and I also have access to capital. But the point is, once, let's say if I have the same 50,000 base opportunity cost, if I invest it in land in Zimbabwe, I would be foregoing investing it in the stock market. So that's where I'm trying to compare to say, now 500,000 versus 82 million if I use the current return that I've been getting. Again, it's extremely difficult to maintain 28% compounded return over time. Perhaps maybe once the portfolio grows maybe above 1 million or so, I start to become more conservative and just maybe put it in the S&P 500 or major indices and diversify it. Still, I could possibly get 10%. It's not guaranteed, but historically the S&P 500 has returned about 10%, right, on average, which is safer. I can easily buy and sell. Real estate, the other challenge is you need to maintain it. You also need to make sure that at the end of the day, right, you have tenants who pay, and who don't destroy the property. So at the end of the day, there are other nuances. So those are the things that I look at. And of course, there are other nuances, location and all those. I'm not going to get into more details about that. Now, high-end locations like Borodale, we are looking at probably average of like 860,000. Chitungwiza, Epworth, we can probably get, 20,000 land and then build. So the other question is, probably if I have, let's say, 50,000, maybe I can buy property or buy a stand in Murambinda, which is a growth point, 25,000, have two properties, rent them out, and probably get, if it's 3, 4, 5 rooms, probably get maybe $250 per month, and then that could be, 7 or more than 6% return per year. That could be another good thing. But again, properties is not just about, some people, they have some attachment with the location. They say, oh, I find a house in Murambinda, I find a house in also in Harare or whatever location. But the point is, it's very, very important to do due diligence, to make sure you do everything above board. Otherwise, you can possibly be scammed. Even in the stock market, you can still lose money. I've seen people who have lost money. I've also lost money, but fortunately, I've made way more money than I have lost. Now, there are also some hidden costs that come with property. investment, which sometimes people don't tell you. Number one, in Zimbabwe, you are looking at capital gains tax of about 20%. So let's say if you buy a rental property, let's say at 100, whatever amount, and then it appreciates, right? Let's say you make a profit of, let's say, 100,000 for simplicity after 5 or 10 years. Assuming these capital gains of 20% remains, you will have to pay 20,000 to the government for that, right? And then you make that. But then you are looking at maybe conveyancing fees of 4%. So 20% capital gains, 4% conveyancing fees, and then also developer council levies. Maybe I will put it at maybe 1%, right? So you are now at 25%. Then there are also other legal fees. Uh, and the 4% I mentioned is just for transfer fees, right? Then the legal fees, actually they are different. So 4 to 12 months, that's what I saw online when you are looking at probably the delays in the process of due diligence and everything. Now it could be much more on the ground, right? But now in Zimbabwe, what I've seen is because of the economic challenges, also people, you have to add other expenses, like after building the land, like I mentioned, you may construct the borehole. It's very important to consult the municipal and the local authorities, but also solar system to be off grid, because there are power cuts. From my research and also my experience living in Zimbabwe, of course, that may be different, but that was my experience over the past couple of when I was there in Zimbabwe. Now, these all add to some complications. Now, as I wrap up, the other important thing is I ask myself, do I want rental income? Do I want to diversify? Maybe I would go for maybe something in Sape or somewhere where it's cheaper. Maybe I could spend maybe up to 50,000, or like I explained, right? But at the end of the day, a lot of people, they want to look at real estate as a long-term wealth builder. And that's usually the case even in the stock market. There are no get-rich-quick schemes. So now, in conclusion, these are some tips for the diaspora and even people in the Zimbabwean market, because it's mostly highly formalized. Of course, there's the formal sector, but a lot of people, they're into mining, buying and selling. So they may not necessarily bank in the sector. So a lot of people, they may not have access to loans. So I was looking at 15 to 17% with some local banks in Zimbabwe, and sometimes even as high as 100% per year, cost of capital. So that's extremely difficult to even raise 50,000, so, or whatever amount. And at the end of the day, it's very, very important to avoid deals where there is no infrastructure or legal clarity. Always make sure you have title deeds and focus on verified properties with clean titles. Like I said, work with trusted lawyers and partners, but also consider a mix of family, home, rental, and also still investments in the stock market. So that's what I also have in mind, to say, look, I think that might be a good idea. Still have some exposure in the US, Canadian market, and global market, at least most of the money, and maybe have some real estate. Maybe if we decide to move to Zimbabwe, we can probably have a home or one or two properties to have some rental income. Now, Zimbabwean property market is not a get rich quick scheme like anywhere else. So it's very, very important to have patience, plan very well, and also make sure you have proper lawyers and partners to make sure that you protect your capital. That's the most important thing, and also preserve long-term value of your asset if you want to choose that route. Now, in conclusion, if you want to learn more about investing in the stock market, or to ask any questions, book a one-on-one coaching session on www.streetwiseeconomics.com. And don't forget to subscribe, like, and share this video so that it goes viral. I would love to hear from you guys. What has been your experiences in real estate markets in Zimbabwe? Tell me. I am signing out. Thank you so much. I will see you in the next video. But for now, bye-bye. I will see you in the next one. Take care.